How do you understand that a person leads a double life? How do you understand that a person is exactly who he claims to be? My wife pretended to be a loving wife and mother of our children, but in fact she was a real cheater. Hello, I'm Mark Francis. This is my story. All right, time for me to get out of bed and start the day. There's a lot I need to handle. Today marks a new beginning. You're wondering what's starting? Well, I am, the rest of my life. Day 1. This is it, as it is. My life may not be much right now, but it's all I've got. I work hard and try to do the right thing. I believe I've been a good father. The kids are great. They're young and full of energy. Keith is 8 and Andrea is 6. They're amazing kids, and they enjoy school. Keith is in 3rd grade, Andrea in 1st. They don't deserve what's about to unfold. This is the result of their mother's choices. Let me take you back a bit so you can understand the situation. So, the kids, both of them take after their mom. They've got her eyes and her smile. Neither of them really resembles me, but hey, I'm not exactly a model, though I'm not hideous either. I'm about 6 feet tall, weigh around 165 pounds. I run every day and hit the gym a couple of times a week. In the summer, I compete in cycling, and during the winter, I ski for fun. I have a full head of dark brown hair, kept short, and thankfully, all my teeth. My parents spent a lot on braces when I was younger, so I've got a decent smile. I wear glasses or contacts, depending on the situation. I'm 34 years old, same as my wife, Karen. We met back in college. I'm an engineer and she works as a web developer. We live in Albany, New York. Yeah, I know, Albany, the most boring city in the world. Honestly, though, life here is calm. Don't get me wrong, Albany is a nice enough place, but maybe it's my life that's dull. Some people, my wife included apparently, would call me boring. In my defense, it's the usual grind of daily life, work, family, home, all the routines, that has turned me into this. When there's time for excitement, we have to squeeze it in between all the other obligations. So fun usually gets relegated to weekends or the occasional summer break. This morning, as I got out of bed and looked at myself in the mirror before my run, I thought, what the hell am I going to do? Because you see, I have a problem. I went out for my usual run, and while I was out there pounding the pavement, I decided I needed to talk to a friend of mine, Jordan Walters. We grew up together and went to school together. He lived just around the corner. Our families know each other well. Jordan's a friend and a lawyer. He mainly handles wills, estates, and business law, but he also does family law. I made a mental note to give him a call. I got home around 6:30, brewed some coffee, showered, and got dressed. By that time, Karen was starting to wake up and the kids were slowly coming to life. I made lunches for the kids, packed a sandwich and some fruit for myself, and before long, everyone was at the counter, munching on cereal and toast. We exchanged small talk about the day, and I was reminded that parent-teacher conferences were coming up soon. All good. I gave everyone a goodbye kiss, except for Keith. He and I bumped fists. That was his new thing. Then I headed out the door for another day in my regular, uneventful life. The day of the parent-teacher conferences also marked a meeting of my own, a 2-person conference with Jordan. We met at a coffee shop halfway between my office and his. We shook hands since it had been a few months since we'd last seen each other and took our seats. We ordered coffee, and I got a slice of apple pie. Jordan, ever focused, jumped right in. Once the coffee and pie were served, he asked, "Okay, Mark, what's going on?" "I need your help. I've got a problem and I need your expertise before I do anything." "All right, what's the problem?" "Karen." He gave me a bewildered look. Wait, what the hell are you talking about? The same Karen you've been married to for, what, 9 years? The mother of your 2 kids? That Karen? I nodded, swallowing a bite of pie. Yeah, that Karen. For fuck's sake, what's the issue? I took a sip of my coffee. Looks like Karen's been involved in some extracurricular activities. For how long, I'm not exactly sure. I spent the next hour telling him what I knew. I had been trying to salvage my dignity, but at this point, I guess I was past that. Mark, I guess you want some background on me and my situation, and that's fair. I grew up in Albany, graduated from high school here, and earned a scholarship to attend Columbia in NYC. I've always been a smart guy, did well in school, and I believe I'm a good person. I try to do the right thing and have a strong work ethic, understanding the importance of family. I come from a solid home. My parents instilled in me a strong foundation of values, teaching me to prioritize family above all else. Now, with my wife and 2 kids, I see the truth in that every day. The problem is, my wife seems to have different ideas about what's important for our family. Karen has been seeing someone else. I'm not sure I can live with it, but I don't know what to do about it either. That's where Jordan came in. I needed his advice, both as a lawyer and as a friend. So, what should I do? Mark, you're really in a tough spot here. Jordan took a sip of his coffee and stared at the table for a moment. He let out a heavy sigh before continuing. All right, there are 2 ways you can approach this. The first, I'll give you as your lawyer. The second, I'll give you as your friend. I nodded, signaling him to go on. First off, and this is me speaking as your lawyer, if you choose to separate or divorce Karen, you're going to lose out. New York family law tends to favor the wife in these situations. Karen will most likely get custody of the kids, and with that, she'll probably get the house too. Unless you can prove that she's an unfit mother, the court will award her custody. You can request custody, but if she contests it, the court will almost automatically side with her. Jordan paused, took another long sip of his coffee, and gestured for a refill. Just as I was about to respond, he raised his hand, asking me to wait. The waitress brought him a fresh cup. Now, along with custody in the house, you'll also be responsible for paying a lot. A big portion of the mortgage in proportion to your incomes, child support until the kids turn 21 or finish college, and probably some support for Karen. They used to call it alimony. Now it's known as spousal support. This was already sounding messy, but the worst part was yet to come. Jordan continued laying out all the details I needed to be aware of. A brief guide to divorce in New York. There are 7 legal grounds for divorce in New York. 1. Irretrievable breakdown of the relationship for at least 6 months. This is commonly referred to as a no-fault divorce. The marriage must have been irreparably broken for at least 6 months, and all financial matters, including debt, division of property, child custody, and support must be resolved. 2. Cruel and inhuman treatment. To use this ground, the judge will assess specific acts of cruelty that occurred within the last 5 years. Mere disagreements or lack of harmony between spouses are not enough. The treatment must be so severe that the plaintiff's physical or mental safety is at risk, making it unsafe or improper to continue living together. 3. Abandonment. For this ground, the spouse must have abandoned the plaintiff for at least 1 year. This can be a physical departure from home without the intention to return, or a constructive departure when one of the spouses refuses to enter into an intimate relationship. 4. Imprisonment. The spouse must have been imprisoned for at least 3 consecutive years after the marriage began. This ground can be used either while the spouse is still in prison or within 5 years of their release. 5. Adultery. To prove adultery, the plaintiff must show that the spouse engaged in infidelity during the marriage. This can be challenging to prove, as testimony from someone other than the plaintiff or spouse is required. 6. Divorce following a legal separation agreement. The plaintiff and defendant must sign and file a valid separation agreement and live separately for 1 year. The agreement must meet specific legal standards to be valid. 7. Divorce after a judgment of separation. This ground is rarely used. It requires the Supreme Court to issue a judgment of separation, after which the couple must live apart for a year. My eyes were starting to glaze over as Jordan droned on, talking about divorce, New York style. So, Mark, if you go down the divorce route, the most likely grounds you'd use are either an irretrievable breakdown or adultery. To prove adultery, you'd need solid proof. Either Karen admitting she's having an affair, or the person she's involved with coming forward, or other evidence to back it up. I took a deep breath and looked at my friend. I knew my expression wasn't good. Jordan continued, "The other option is citing irretrievable breakdown of your marriage, which is the most common reason people give for divorce." He paused for emphasis. "You might want to think about that before deciding." I was speechless. I had no idea what to say. Jordan sighed and pressed on. "Okay, I've told you what I needed to as your lawyer. Now let me talk to you as your friend." I looked up, desperate for a lifeline. I needed to hear that my life wasn't completely falling apart, that the comfortable life I'd had with my family might somehow continue. I finally said, "Jesus Christ, Jordan. I hope you've got something better in your bag of tricks than the misery you just laid out. Dude, you need to figure out what it is you really want. What are you saying? I want my family, I want my wife, my kids. I want my life with them to go on, just like before." I figured that. So listen carefully. You need to decide what matters most to you. Is it your family or a bit of your pride and ego? Huh? What do you mean? Look, I see a lot of people get caught up in wanting revenge, wanting to do as much damage as possible. The whole scorched earth approach. They sacrifice everything just to make the other person miserable. But in the end, they only make themselves miserable. Jordan let that sink in. And don't forget, the biggest losers in divorce are usually the kids. You need to think about how much you want them to suffer. My head snapped up and I locked eyes with my friend. What? Yeah, the kids. Your kids are the ones who are going to suffer the most. He paused again. They'll have to adjust to only seeing you a few days a month and every other holiday. You'll need to get used to being a part-time dad. Karen will have custody, and there will be long stretches where you won't have them around. You can count on that. Jesus, what am I supposed to do? Jordan, what do I do? I couldn't believe what he was saying. You always hear about dads who hardly get to see their kids, dads who are wrecked by divorce. I didn't want to become one of those casualties. No way. Jordan looked at me, his face a mix of sympathy and disbelief. He was a good friend, but also a realist, someone who saw the fallout from divorces all the time. Mark, can I offer you some advice? Of course, what is it? This might sound unconventional, but I've seen it work. What? The decision is entirely yours, but if I were in your position, here's what I'd seriously consider doing. Go ahead. Do nothing. Wait, what? Do nothing. Go home and act like you don't know anything. Continue living your life as you always have. Go home, enjoy your family. Keep doing all the usual things you do. Play with your kids, be intimate with your wife, carry on. You're serious? As serious as a heart attack. You told me you almost never found out that Karen was cheating. You said you hadn't noticed anything different. You said she's always been a great wife and mother. She takes care of the family and puts you first. By your own words, she's a good wife. But nothing. Like I said, the choice is ultimately yours. But you need to decide whether you want to ignore what you've learned to protect your family. Think about it. How much do you want to keep your family intact? Enough to overlook her dishonesty? Enough to set aside the affair and pretend nothing has changed? We both finished our now cold coffee. The waitress kept glancing at us, clearly hinting that it was time to either order food or pay the bill and leave so she could seat paying customers. Oh my God, I sighed, as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. I really need to think this over. Jordan stood up and I followed. We both tossed a $20 bill on the table and headed for the door. Outside, Jordan turned to me and said, "I've got to get back to the office. Call me anytime if you need to talk. Let's grab a beer Friday afternoon, and you can tell me what's going through your head. But until then, promise me you won't make any decisions. Deal?" Deal. Thanks for listening and for the advice, I guess. My mind's racing with a million thoughts, and I need to sort through it all. We went our separate ways. I walked back to my office, trying not to get run over along the way. I returned home and decided to follow Jordan's advice. I was just like any other day after work. I kissed my wife and chatted with the kids as usual. Karen was her typical self. We had dinner together, I helped the kids with their homework, and then we played basketball in the driveway. Everything felt perfectly normal. After the kids got ready for bed and settled down with their books, no screens, just good old paper, I took a moment to observe Karen. I focused on remembering what had drawn me to her in the first place. Her smile, her shape, her eyes, the curve of her hips, the way she moved. I fell in love with her the moment we met. I knew she was the one I wanted to spend my life with and the mother of my children. So, what went wrong? How did we lose our way? From the outside, our family looked perfect. No one would suspect there was an issue. We acted like a loving family, holding hands in public, sharing kisses, and having our kids come to us with their problems or just for fun. We were a tight-knit team of 4. As I walked around the house, I took stock of all the projects Karen had completed. She excelled at home decorating and renovations, showing relentless energy. She transformed nearly every room, from simple paint jobs to custom cabinetry and even bathroom remodels. I was often her main helper, but she was the creative force behind it all. How did she find time to be with other men? Sometimes I could barely squeeze in a trip to the bathroom. My wife was a master of deceit. You're probably curious about how I discovered she was seeing someone else. It's a fair question. In my job, I often meet with clients to discuss their needs for various projects our company is handling. Typically, we hold these meetings in our offices, the clients' offices, or at construction sites. Occasionally, we meet at other venues. On the particular day, we were in a small conference room at the Hilton Hotel. The clients weren't from Albany. They had traveled there specifically for our meeting and were staying at the hotel. They arranged the conference room and even organized lunch for us. During lunch, I decided to step outside for a bit of fresh air. I planned to take a walk around the block to stretch my legs and ponder a design issue we were facing for the upcoming construction. As I was returning to the hotel, a cab pulled up at the entrance, and a tall man around 35 to 40 years old, dressed in a very expensive suit, got out. Following him was a woman who looked strikingly similar to my wife. I was walking toward the entrance, about 100 feet behind them. He took her hand, and they hurried into the hotel. I quickened my pace, nearly catching up to them as they entered the elevator. Once inside and with no one else around, he wrapped his arm around her waist. I could see clearly that it was Karen. As the elevator doors closed, she said something to him, and he leaned down to kiss her on the lips. In that moment, my world came crashing down. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes trying to process what I had just witnessed. I shook my head, reminding myself to breathe as my chest tightened. I genuinely thought I might be having a heart attack. My legs felt shaky, so I made my way to a chair and sat down. I remained there until someone from my meeting walked by and asked if I was returning. When I went back, I couldn't focus on a single word being said. Thankfully, there were minutes taken, so I wouldn't mess up the contract. I went home right after the meeting, bracing myself for Karen to be packing her things and preparing to leave me. Instead, she was there, busy with the kids and getting dinner ready, greeting me just as she did every night. That was a few weeks ago, and since then I've been tormented by everything. Karen, our marriage, the kids, my life overall, and how incredibly foolish I had been. I was a complete wreck. Eventually, I decided it was time to make a plan. But I knew I needed help, which led me to talk to my friend Jordan.
Jordan, I can't believe what Karen is doing. After Mark came to see me, I thought there would be some changes in his life. I knew he needed to take action. I had warned him that divorce would be tough on both the kids and him, but I understand how much a person can endure. The key is to identify what matters most to you and prioritize that. Everything else comes after. In Mark's situation, he chose to prioritize the kids and set his own interests aside. So he decided to tolerate Karen and her other life. I enlisted my usual investigator to look into Karen. I wanted to have a clearer picture of her activities before informing Mark. If he were to find out the whole truth, it could devastate him.
Mark. I've heard that time heals all wounds, and wounds all heal. Not sure how accurate that is. What I do know is that I managed to set aside my pride and act as if I was oblivious. It's strange. If I hadn't seen Karen get into that elevator when I did, I might still be in the dark. Karen has always been the same person. She's a fantastic mother and fiercely protective of our kids. She's organized and dedicated. To me, she's the same woman I fell in love with and married 10 years ago. But now, things have changed. I'm still uncertain about what to do. Should I confront her and end things? Should I bring it up and suggest marriage counseling? What if she's the one who wants to leave me? And what about the kids? If Karen is in love with this guy and wants to choose him over us, I really don't know what to do. That's where Jordan comes in. He's my secret weapon, here to help me navigate this mess.
Jordan, I had my investigator do some digging. Wolfie is excellent at her job. Her real name is Hannah Wolfenstein, but everyone calls her Wolfie. She's a former police detective from New York City who was shot in the knee and retired on medical grounds. In her mid-30s, she's tall, blonde, slender, and very attractive. She blends into various environments, which makes her great for surveillance. Plus, she has access to a wide range of technical tools. She's my go-to for information and usually comes through. She's not inexpensive, but you get what you pay for. I called Wolfie and asked her to stop by my office. As soon as she arrived, I felt an immediate attraction. She has that effect on men. Her knee is almost fully healed, so you can barely tell she had any issues while walking. Once she settled in, I offered her a cup of coffee and we began. "Jordo, what can I help you with?" she asked. That's her nickname for me. "I've got another case of a wife cheating on her husband. This time, it's the wife of one of my closest friends." I handed her the file we had compiled on Karen, which included her workplace details, addresses, phone numbers, a photo of her, her car, license plate, and a brief bio with her height, weight, and other useful information. While I gathered the legal details, Wolfie specializes in digging deeper into people's lives, including their financial matters. I took a sip of my coffee and continued. Her husband saw her at the Hilton downtown with a man who seemed far too friendly. This guy is likely a friend with benefits. I need to find out what they're up to and how long this has been going on. Any information you can gather will help her husband decide about a possible divorce and what grounds to use. Ultimately, I need leverage to ensure he gets custody of their kids if it comes to that. Wolfie nodded, jotting down more notes as I spoke. She had experience in this, and I felt certain that whatever Karen was up to, Wolfie would uncover it. She glanced at me and said, "You know I don't work for free. I'll need my usual retainer up front and my standard hourly rate." Wiggling her nose, she added, "I'll need at least 3 hours to devise a plan and conduct an electronic search. I'll touch base in 2 days with a more accurate estimate. Does that work for you and your client?" "Perfect. He's very patient, but he wants information before taking any action. We'll talk in 2 days." Wolfie gathered up the folder, put it in her big bag, and stood up. When she reached the door, she stopped and turned slightly. "Do you remember that you still owe me dinner?" "How could I forget?" She glanced at my crotch with a smile.
Hannah, I can't stand women who think they can do whatever they want with their unsuspecting husbands and face no consequences. I've met too many decent women who cheat on men who support them and finance their desired lifestyle. My client is a devoted family man who was stunned when he accidentally saw his wife holding hands and kissing another man in the elevator of one of the best hotels in the city centre. Jordo, my client, doesn't want to kick her out right away. He just wants to understand what's really going on and explore possible options. I have faced similar situations before. Jordo wants to keep the family together as much as possible, but I know that everyone has their limits. Even the most rational and balanced men can reach the limit and commit acts that they will regret later. Right now, I need to figure out who Karen Francis really is. I suspect she may have cheated before. Perhaps she was either careless in her actions or this was her first time. I'm not sure yet, but I'll find out. I'm going to email Jordo my estimate, and as soon as he approves it, I'll start.
Mark, 3 weeks later. I got a call from Jordan. His investigator had been working hard and now had a report for me. I really hope that what I saw has some kind of explanation. If it turns out to be something more, I have no idea how I'll handle it. When I arrived at Jordan's office, he led me into a small conference room. His expression already told me that the news I was about to receive wasn't going to be what I wanted to hear. After brief introductions, Jordan began. "Mark, Wolfie has uncovered quite a bit of information. She'll go over it with you and then we'll need to discuss it. Unfortunately, your suspicion is correct. Karen is involved with another man. Wolfie will explain the rest." I turned to the investigator. "Mr. Francis, I started looking into your wife as soon as Jordan informed me of what you needed to know. I've discovered a significant amount about Mrs. Francis, and I regret to inform you that she has been seeing another man for quite some time." I grabbed a bottle of water, took a sip, and immediately rushed to the washroom. Everything I had eaten in the past 12 hours came up as I leaned over the toilet. The room spun around me, and I think I blacked out for a moment. The next thing I knew, Jordan and Hannah were supporting me. Jordan held a towel under my chin, while Hannah wiped my face with a damp cloth. After a few minutes, I managed to make my way back to the conference room. When the world finally slowed down, Jordan asked if I wanted to continue or pause and revisit this later. I took several deep breaths before telling him I preferred to proceed. It was better to face this now than to prolong it. Hannah resumed. "Mr. Francis, we conducted a thorough electronic search of your wife, and I must say there's surprisingly little information about her online. She works as a web developer, which likely allows her to control her online presence. She has a Facebook page, and that's about it. She doesn't engage with other social media platforms. Her posts are all family-related, consisting of ordinary, everyday details. There are some photos of you, her, and the children, all very harmless and depicting family activities. I also reviewed her Facebook friends and investigated them for any potential disguises. I looked at her confused. What I mean is, are any of her Facebook friends not who they claim to be? That could allow them to direct message each other and then delete the messages, keeping them hidden from you or anyone else. We didn't find anyone who wasn't a real person. However, that doesn't rule out the possibility of her using a fake account under a different name, which is quite common and difficult to track if she accesses it from an unknown device. I could hardly process what I was hearing. Hannah glanced at me and continued. So we had to resort to some traditional methods. We attached a tracking device to your wife's car and monitored her movements. In the first week, we simply recorded the locations she visited and eliminated obvious places: work, home, your children's school, the grocery store you usually go to, and so on. After that, we decided when and where to follow Mrs. Francis to observe her interactions and activities. That's when we began to get to the heart of the matter. Oh my God. In the second week, we installed a listening device in Mrs. Francis's car, capable of recording any conversations inside. The recorder is voice-activated and filters out typical car and road noises. It also allows us to remotely access it to monitor any discussions that take place. Through this, we learned that Mrs. Francis planned to meet with a Mr. Thomas Murray. Are you familiar with him? I shook my head. No. She took a sip of water and continued with the grim details. We looked into Mr. Murray and found that he's a corporate lawyer currently assigned to the state of New York's comptroller's office. He's working on a procurement and contracting project there. It appears the state sought outside assistance for this project, but the rest isn't crucial. We conducted a thorough investigation into Mr. Murray and found out that he is married to Brittany Murray, and they reside in Albany with their daughter Allison. Hannah showed me pictures of Thomas Murray, Brittany, their daughter, and their house. She asked, "Does it look familiar, or does this house remind me of something?" I shook my head. Not really. He may have been the man Karen was with, but to be honest, I wasn't focused on him. I was focused on her. We learned from the recording on the dictaphone in Mrs. Francis's car that last Wednesday she intended to meet with Mr. Murray at a hotel on the East Side. We were there, watched their arrival, and took these photos. She handed me some pictures of her and Karen holding hands. It seemed like they could make love right here in the hotel lobby. She was holding his hand. Hannah paused, letting me digest the information before continuing. As soon as we found out who Mrs. Francis was meeting with, we conducted a comprehensive background check on Mr. Murray. We believe they were a couple in college before you met her. The room began to spin again. Jordan handed me a paper bag and told me to breathe into it, which helped a little. Hannah glanced at Jordan, waiting for a clue whether to continue. I looked back at her and said, "Keep going," then took a sip of water. We reviewed the university's records and found that Mr. Murray was in his third year when Mrs. Francis started as a freshman. They dated for 2 years and lived together for about a year. After that, they broke up, and Mrs. Francis moved into the dorms. I believe it was shortly after that when you met her. Were you able to discover the reason for their breakup? Yes, Mr. Murray attended law school in North Carolina, where he met his wife. They got married around the time he graduated, and their child was born about 6 months later. He got her pregnant. Exactly. When did Karen start seeing him again? We're not completely sure, but in reviewing his financial records, we found he has a separate bank account that's not connected to his other accounts. I suspect he keeps this hidden from his wife. He uses this account to pay for a hotel room almost every week. Does Karen have a hidden bank account that she hasn't told me about? Hannah hesitated before responding, and I immediately sensed what the answer would be. Yes, she does. It's at a credit union near her office, and we found she has about $40,000 in that account. I glanced at both Jordan and Hannah. How on earth did she manage to get that kind of money? I handle the taxes and everything is pretty straightforward. We save every month, but not like that. We suspect she's been skimming money by receiving 2 paychecks. One, about 75% of her salary goes into your joint account, while the other 25% goes into her personal account. She also has a separate credit card at that credit union, and she uses a burner flip phone to contact Mr. Murray. Oh my God, my wife is leading a double life. What the hell? Hannah turned to Jordan, who nodded in response before speaking. Mark, we have, some additional information you need to hear, and this is the hardest part. How could it get any worse? Jesus, Jordan, how much more can there be? Well, this isn't what I had hoped, but it's something you need to know. You have a right to know. Now I was truly confused. All right, just tell me. With a look of utter despair, Jordan said, Go ahead, Wolfie, you can tell him. Mr. Francis, when I discover long-term infidelity, I broaden the investigation to include other family members. Last year, your children's school took DNA cheek swabs in case of an abduction or other emergencies. We accessed your kids' DNA and compared it with yours and Mrs. Francis's. The results confirmed what you might expect. She is the mother. But when we compared your DNA with the children's, we found that you are not their biological father. What? Sir, I regret to inform you that you are not the biological father of Keith and Andrea. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's impossible. You must be mistaken. Jordan interjected, Mark, I know this is hard to accept. We used your DNA from the paper coffee cup you left last time you visited, and we conducted the tests twice. We are certain that someone else is the biological father of your children. My world has come crashing down again. I felt suffocated, on the verge of passing out as the room spun around me. I had to lay down on the floor. In the brief moment it took for Hannah to share the results of the DNA tests, everything I knew fell apart. I have a wife who cheated on me, and I don't have any children. As you can imagine, it took me a while to process what Jordan and Hannah had told me. Hannah had prepared a thorough written report and even provided it on a memory stick for my use. Jordan kept a complete copy for his records, anticipating it would be useful later for the divorce proceedings. I had a question for Hannah. Have you been able to figure out who the father of my children, Karen's children, is? We haven't gone that far yet, but if you'd like, we can perform certain procedures to collect DNA from another person and compare it with the children's. I nodded. Please do that. I want to know who their father is. I'm assuming it's Thomas Murray. Hannah glanced at Jordan and then back at me. That's who we believe is the biological father. Right, go ahead, I want to find out. I paused for a moment. I don't need to know how you do it, but please find out and let me know. Once we were finished, Hannah gathered her materials and handed the folder to Jordan. She stood up to leave. Mr. Francis, for what it's worth, aside from her brief encounters with Mr. Murray, I think Mrs. Francis does genuinely love you. She exhibits all the signs of a woman who cares for her husband. I know that may not mean much right now, but think it over before you act. And one last piece of advice. Please don't do anything reckless that could land you in jail. It won't help. Hannah turned to Jordan, gesturing for him to follow her. They stepped out into the hallway and spoke quietly. I noticed her nodding in my direction a few times before she kissed Jordan on the cheek and left. I suspected they were friends with benefits. Jordan returned to the room. We sat in silence for a few minutes, then he stood up. "Come on, you're coming with me."
Karen. Oh my God, I can't believe how much pleasure Tommy gives me. He's so good at it. I know what you're thinking. Is it normal to be married and have a lover? Yes, it's normal, at least for me. And as far as I know, relatively common for married people to love someone other than their partners. It happens more often than you think, but not all people who fall in love with others end their marriages. I love Mark, very strongly. At the same time, I'm just in love with Tommy. You think I'm crazy and just a lying woman. You can think whatever you want, but this is my life. Mark doesn't know about Tommy, and Tommy's wife doesn't know about me. We both want to keep it that way. We spend one afternoon a week together. That's all. We've been doing this for years. I loved Tommy long before either of us was married to Mark or Brittany, before any of us had kids. Tommy met Brittany while in law school, and when she became pregnant, he did the right thing and married her. Our relationship ended then, and shortly after, I met Mark. We dated, I fell in love with him, and we got married. Not long after that, I ran into Tommy, and we began seeing each other again. We never stopped loving each other, but we both had new commitments and lives to navigate. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't bear to be without Tommy. Mark is my husband, and I love him deeply, but I believe Tommy was my true love. The issue is that we both had spouses to whom we had committed, making our love for each other feel like a secondary priority. We started meeting regularly once a week. After a few months, I realized that I was pregnant. Mark was thrilled with the news that he had become a father, but I wasn't sure if it was his child or Tommy's. It didn't really matter at the time. The intimacy during pregnancy was amazing. I needed it every day, morning and evening, and I got exactly that. After Keith was born, Tommy and I took a break, given the challenges of being a new parent. Mark embraced fatherhood effortlessly. He's an incredible dad. He works tirelessly, spending the whole day at work and then coming home to take over parenting so I could shower and rest. As I adjusted to motherhood, it didn't take long before I had everything under control, managing to balance things smoothly. When Keith turned 1, I got pregnant with Andrea. Those 3 years were tough, but also amazing. My husband is my hero. He makes life with him, and the kids a true joy. My time with Tommy is something I need. It makes me feel good, attractive, and does things for my mental well-being that Mark just can't. This doesn't mean Mark is any less of a husband, person, or man. Definitely not. They're just different, and I need both of them. I want them both. I can only have a limited amount of Tommy since Brittany has the biggest part of him, and that's fair. I have all of Mark. He shows me every day how much he loves me and the kids. I know we mean the world to him.
Mark? I had to get Jordan to drive me home in my car, and he took a cab back to his office. When I got home, I wandered around the house, looking at everything as if I had never seen it before. I went to Keith and Andrea's rooms, just staring at them. I remembered all the times I had read them bedtime stories, cared for them when they had colds, changed their dirty diapers when they were babies. I carried them around the house, walking them to sleep at night. They were my kids. They have my last name. My name is on their birth certificates. How could Karen lie to me for so long? Why would she do that? If she didn't want to have kids with me, why didn't she just tell me? Why did we even get married? Why? We painted and redecorated the kids' rooms several times, once when they were newborns and again when they started school. We added desks, changed the paint, and made the rooms theirs. They even helped pick out some of the furniture. Then I went to our family room, where the walls are lined with framed photos of us as a family. Some were from vacations we took. Others were formal Christmas portraits. They showed the kids growing up and our family through the years. Why did she have to ruin it all? Why turn our marriage into a lie? Why take away from me one of the things that mattered most? I hate her right now. I loved her, but now I hate her. Why did she have to be so cruel? I don't know what to do. I don't know what I can do. Jordan was right. For now, I need to do nothing. I don't want to hurt the kids. I have a lot to figure out, and then I'll make a plan.
Karen. I returned home after meeting Tommy just before Mark returned. I always take a shower after meeting Tommy. It usually leaves a lot of residue in me, and although I feel fine at the moment, it means I need to take a shower before heading home. I can always track where Mark is on his phone using the Find Me app. It works great, and the phone is always with him. I like to know where he is, especially when he's out with the kids, because I worry about them. In fact, Tommy and I are just focused on each other for the sake of having an amazing time. I love Mark, and deep down, I know that Tommy loves Brittany too. Her pregnancy was not part of Tommy's plans, but when it happened, he intervened and did the right thing. She's a really good person, and I know they're a great couple. Tommy and I just share a common need, which we don't always have time for at home. Don't get me wrong, Mark is an amazing lover. He knows how to satisfy me. We are close several times a week, mostly on weekends. You may wonder why, if my husband and I are doing so well, Tommy is still my lover. In fact, everything is simple. I want him to be my lover. I need the attention he gives me. Tommy and I were together before Mark, before Brittany. He was the man I thought I was going to marry. I was in love with him, and I still love him. But life doesn't always go according to plan. The reality was that Tommy and I weren't going to be together, so I settled on the second option. I met Mark and married him. Mark is a wonderful man, sweet, loyal, attentive, hardworking, tactful, a great father, and he will do anything I ask him. So why isn't that enough for me? Why do I still need Tommy? Again, it's simple. I want it. When Tommy and I ended things, it wasn't because I didn't love him or didn't want to be with him. It wasn't even because I didn't want to build a family with him. It was because he got Brittany pregnant and had to marry her. Mark and Tommy complement each other perfectly. They both meet different needs I have, making me a very happy woman. With Mark, I receive love and respect. He's so kind, honest, and such an ideal husband that any woman would be fortunate to have him. I'm lucky to have him. He's thoughtful, attentive, and the physical closeness we share makes me feel completely warm inside. He truly is the perfect husband, the perfect father, and our deep connection makes him mine. But I also share a strong bond with Tommy. What I feel when I'm with him is something I can't give up. Our time together is meant only for ourselves, away from everything else. There are no worries about family, work, or anything else. Just the feeling that we create together during these few hours. When it's all over, we take a shower, get dressed, and return to the reality of our lives. Before I break up with Tommy, I always check my phone to find out where Mark is, just to avoid random encounters that would be difficult to explain. I'm going back to my life, and Tommy's going back to his. It's a routine that has worked well for many years, and I don't plan to change it anytime soon.
Mark. It's been nearly 2 weeks since Jordan and Hannah revealed the truth about what Karen has been doing throughout our entire marriage. I feel utterly foolish. I've been manipulated by her. All this time she claimed to love me. I thought we were building a life, a family, a home, and a future together. My hopes and dreams were shattered in an instant. My whole married life feels like a deception. Now I'm at a loss for what to do. How do I cope with this? When I look at Karen, I see the woman I married. Sweet, charming, beautiful, talented, hard-working, and a wonderful mother. But now I can't help but think of our children as hers, not mine. They belong to Thomas Murray. I don't have any children. I feel so betrayed. I can't really discuss this with anyone. Jordan and I had a drink 3 days ago, and he suggested I see a psychologist. He even provided me with a name and made an appointment for me. I'll see if that helps.
Karen. I've noticed that Mark has been really distracted over the past couple of weeks. I often have to repeat myself for him to hear and understand me. He seems to be ignoring the kids. Andrea has to pull on his arm just to get his attention. He apologizes for not listening, but soon after, he seems to drift off again. He's been putting in a lot of extra hours at work and missed the school meetings we had planned to attend together. I ended up going alone. He wakes up very early to go running. He usually runs for about 45 minutes, showers, and then comes home. Recently, he's been running for an hour and a half before returning. He hardly eats during meals and hasn't interacted with me or the kids beyond the bare minimum.
Mark, I attended my session with the psychologist, Dr. Marilyn Snow. She's a kind woman, probably in her 60s, with a very soothing demeanor. I explained my situation to her and shared how it made me feel. She asked if I had any plans for the future. What was I going to do? Was I considering confronting Karen? Divorce? Forgiveness? I told her that I was overwhelmed and struggling to come up with a clear plan. I mentioned that my friend and lawyer, Jordan, had advised me not to take any action until I was certain about what I wanted. Dr. Snow agreed that it was a good short-term strategy, but then asked, "What about the long term?" I still didn't have an answer. I realized that if the affair had been brief, I probably could have forgiven her. But finding out that she never really stopped seeing her true lover, and that he's the father of her children, it was a gut punch that's hard to move past. Even if I stayed with Karen, how could I ever trust her again? If I accepted the situation, would I be content knowing I was her second choice? That I was raising another man's children? That she had deceived me throughout our entire marriage? And if Murray and his wife separated or divorced, would Karen run straight to him? That's the real question. How could I ever find happiness now knowing what I know?
Jordan. It's been over a month since I last saw Mark, and he wants to meet at my office later today. He says he wants to discuss his draft plan for handling the situation with Karen. I met him at the door, and we headed straight to the conference room. Mark took off his jacket, and I handed him a bottle of water. He opened it and took a sip. "So, what's on your mind today?" "Jordan, I've been struggling with this ever since Hannah told me what Karen's really up to. I saw that psychologist you recommended, and she helped me gain some perspective. I've been trying to be honest with myself. I've thought long and hard about this whole mess, and I believe I've made a few decisions." "All right, good. How can I assist you?" "Here's my draft plan." Mark proceeded to explain his plan in detail. It was straightforward and simple, but there were specific issues that needed careful attention. My job was to start the paperwork and be prepared to file the necessary requests with the court. Mark had already spoken with his banker and had a lengthy conversation with his employer. Now it was all about timing and details. I'd need Wolfie's help to carry out the execution phase of the plan.
2 weeks later, Mark. "Oh my goodness, it's so hot. Can someone please turn on the air conditioning?" So 2 days ago, I took a train from Albany to NYC, then hopped on the subway to JFK. My Air France flight took nearly 18 hours to reach my destination, with a plane change and a 4-hour layover in Paris. Welcome to the United Arab Emirates, specifically the city of Dubai, my new home, at least for now. I've started a new job with an engineering firm working on a significant project here in the UAE. You're probably wondering how this happened. Well, in my line of work, engineers are constantly being recruited for projects around the world. My boss was always fending off attempts to lure his team away. However, there are times when it can be beneficial for an engineer to join another company for a specific project, usually to gain expertise in a particular area, and then bring that knowledge back. This is one of those situations. So, I landed a job with a British company working on a major construction project in Dubai. The work is going to be intense, but the rewards will be substantial. The salary and benefits are incredibly generous. My base pay is 100,000 dirhams a month, which is around 25,000 US dollars. On top of that, there are additional benefits. The best part is that there are no income taxes in the UAE. That's right, no income taxes. I don't plan on staying here for more than 2 years. Culturally, it's not a place where I'd feel comfortable living long term, but who knows? Things could change. I don't have any fixed plans apart from working and earning as much as possible. The climate here is vastly different from central New York, and it's going to take some time to adjust. The job includes an apartment and a car. The apartment is ultra-modern, located in a high-rise with underground parking and every amenity you can imagine. As for the car, it's a black Mercedes E450, sleek and fast. A big upgrade from the old Subaru Outback I used to drive in Albany. The company assigned me an assistant, Amanda, a British woman in her late 20s, maybe 28 or 30. She's tall, slim, with long dark brown hair, black glasses, and has a classic, understated British elegance. Her accent suggests she comes from a more privileged background and has received an excellent education. Amanda holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's in international relations. She also speaks the local language, which will undoubtedly be invaluable. She picked me up from the airport and drove me to the apartment. I didn't bring much, just my old leather briefcase and one suitcase. I figured I could buy whatever else I needed. During the drive, she talked almost nonstop about the UAE, the city, and its people. Her comments were a mix of criticism and praise. I started thinking this new job might be both challenging and enjoyable. When I left Albany, I knew chaos would unfold. But it wasn't my problem anymore. Karen and her boyfriend created the mess. They could deal with it. The kids were the ones I felt worst for. I would have taken them with me, but no judge would ever agree to that, separating them from their mother. But I know you're more interested in how things ended in Albany.
Jordan. My meeting with Mark lasted a couple of hours. He brought some notes in a folder with various topics he wanted to discuss. He needed me to coordinate several things for him simultaneously. So this marks the end of Karen Francis and Thomas Murray. Hannah had figured out where and when Karen and Murray met each week. Sometimes it was at a hotel on the outskirts of the city, near the FedEx facility. Not one of the larger or well-known ones, but a place they could afford. Who said affairs come cheap? The convenience of the location was that it was close to the highway, making it easy for them to get there. Murray had a friend who occasionally let him use the spare bedroom in his apartment to save costs. They really liked that, though the friend didn't provide towels. Mark informed me that he planned to pack up in the morning and head to the train station. He was leaving the country. He didn't tell me where he was going, but that wasn't important, as long as I had his email address. He would drop the kids off at school, and after Karen left for work, he'd go home, grab his bag, and take a cab to the train station. That's where Wolfie came into the plan. She would have a packet of documents and other information ready for Karen, prepared to serve her. Mark wanted us to wait until they were in the hotel room, likely with Murray deeply involved with Karen. The plan was to knock on the door, pretending to be the police, and demand they open it. When they did, Wolfie would ask Karen for ID, take a photo of it, and then hand her the packet with the usual statement, "You've been served." Wolfie was highly skilled at this and would make sure to get photos of the two of them before leaving. The envelope for Karen contained the usual divorce papers, but also copies of the DNA test proving that Mark isn't the father of the children and that Murray is. Along with that, there were transcripts of phone calls between Karen and Murray arranging their affair, as well as a few photos to confirm they had been caught. I was waiting for Wolfie to call and let me know that she had served the papers. Once that was done, my next step was to contact Brittany Murray and fill her in on everything that had come to light. I invited her to my office, where I would gladly go over all the details with her. Mark wanted to sue Murray to recover some of the money he had spent over the past 8 years raising Keith and Andrea. though he knew it was a long shot. We discussed the pros and cons, and Mark ultimately decided he didn't want Brittany and her daughter to suffer because of her husband's actions. D-Day yesterday, I got a call from Mark letting me know that today would be D-Day. He called it that because it was the day he'd be leaving, starting his new life. I immediately called Wolfie, and she planned to come to my office first thing this morning to pick up the document packages and finalize her plan. When Wolfie arrived, she was clearly excited. I smiled and asked, "What's got you so worked up?" With a huge grin, she said, "This woman is about to face the consequences of messing with a man who dedicated his life to her and what he thought were his kids. She deserves everything that's coming her way." We sat at the conference table while I organized everything into large envelopes and labeled them. Wolfie and I chatted for a bit, had some coffee, and then she left to stake out the building where Karen worked. A little after noon, Wolfie called to tell me Karen was on the move. All I had to do was wait and be ready to call Brittany Murray.
Karen. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and noticed that Tommy was already there, his SUV parked at the far end. I parked my car and got out, meeting him at the side entrance of the hotel. He already had a room key. I kissed him, and holding hands, we entered the hotel and took the elevator. As soon as we entered the room, a spark flashed between us. After Mark had shown me little affection for weeks, I needed Tommy. The feeling of his hands on my skin was like an electric shock. We were already lying on the bed and sharing the moment. At that moment, there was a loud knock on the door. A loud voice called out, "Mrs. Karen Francis, I know you're there. Please open the door." We both froze, staring at each other, then at the door. What the hell? "Mrs. Karen Francis, open the door, or the hotel security will open it." Oh, shit. Tommy hurriedly searched for his trousers and shirt, while I grabbed everything I could find to get dressed. The knocking continued. "Mrs. Francis, we're going to open the door now." Wait, I'll open it." In the end, Tommy opened the door, putting on a chain so that it would not open completely. When he did, we heard, "Mr. Murray, please open the door or we'll open it ourselves." Tommy looked back at me, and seeing that I was almost wearing a skirt and blouse, closed the door, took off the chain, and opened it a little more. The woman who was knocking on the door and shouting at us came inside, looking right at me. "Are you Mrs. Karen Francis?" There was a kind of badge attached to the waistband of her trousers. I nodded in response. "I need you to tell me yes or no, please." "Ah, yes." She stepped closer. "I need to see some photo ID, please." I scanned the area, found my purse, and took out my driver's license. She snapped a picture of it with her phone. Then she handed me a large envelope. "You've been served." Turning to Tommy, she handed him an envelope as well and said, "Mr. Thomas Murray, you've been served." She stepped back and quickly took pictures of us before turning to leave. What the hell was that? I glanced at the envelope and realized my world had just shattered. It dawned on me that Mark had discovered Tommy. His silence over the past few weeks suddenly made sense. The room began to spin, and I think I fainted. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying on the bed. Tommy was in a chair, focused on his phone. I rushed to the bathroom and barely made it to the toilet before throwing up. I stayed there until I felt steady enough to stand, then returned to the room to gather my things. "I have to go home." I left without even glancing at Tommy. Karen. I somehow made it home without having an accident and stepped inside. Mark, where are you, dear?" I checked every room in the house, even the kids' rooms, but he was nowhere to be found. When I returned to the kitchen, I noticed a white envelope leaning against the island with my name on it. I opened it to find a single sheet of paper and Mark's wedding ring. Damn. I sat down and opened it. "Karen, by now, you must be aware that I know about your long-term affair with Thomas Murray. You and he were involved even before our marriage. If you haven't reviewed the documents you received, I suggest you do so soon. They reveal that I am not the father of Keith and Andrea. That role was given to Thomas Murray. What hurts the most is not being the father to the children I've tried to love and raise. Your betrayal shattered everything. For that, I can never forgive you. So, what does this mean for us? I have left. I didn't take much, so the house and everything else are yours to manage as you see fit. Jordan will bring you some paperwork later, but I have transferred my interests in the house and all our possessions to you. Given how convincingly you hid your deceit for so long, I suppose you're curious about how I discovered your affair with Thomas Murray. It happened completely by chance. I was at a meeting at the same hotel where you and he met for your encounters. During a break, I went for a walk and saw you both getting into an elevator. You turned to kiss him, and the expression on your face reminded me of the way you used to look at me, back when I thought you loved me. How naive I was. I will not contact you again, allowing you to continue your life while I move on with mine. I regret that Keith and Andrea will be the ones to suffer the most because of this. Your hidden life will affect them. Perhaps they can get to know their true father, and I hope he will be good to them. I will truly miss them. Goodbye, Mark. I placed the letter on the counter and moved to the sofa in the family room, sinking into it. I took out my cell phone and called Mark. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and dial again. Great. I then called his office. The woman who answered said Mark had left the company and had no information about his whereabouts or plans. Fantastic. Next, I reached out to his mother, but she was completely clueless about what I was asking. I thanked her and ended the call. Wonderful. Finally, I opened the envelope containing all the documents and began to examine them. There it was. Every mistake I'd made over the past decade, laid out in black and white, accompanied by a few full-color photos. The DNA lab results were included too. I had never tested the kids' DNA, but I had known they were Tommy's as they grew older, and their features changed from when they were toddlers. What have I done?
Mark Jordan emailed me to update me on how things unfolded regarding Karen's affair. It was a tough time, but I realized my life with her was over. I couldn't look at her again and believe she ever truly loved me. I was just her backup. When I found out that Murray was the father of the kids, that sealed the deal. I had to leave and not look back. I've been in the UAE for a month now and have mostly adjusted. I spoke with my parents and explained what happened. Although they were saddened, they understood that I couldn't endure the humiliation from Karen. I'm still young and will find someone new to share my life with. Jordan mentioned that things between Thomas Murray and his wife Brittany were tense. She reached out to Jordan and even visited his office, where he revealed everything he knew about her husband's long-term affair with Karen. As far as he knew, Brittany hadn't made any decisions about kicking him out yet. Karen visited Jordan, demanding to know my whereabouts. Since he didn't know, he didn't have to lie. He had her sign some paperwork to file with the court, including divorce documents and a special request I made. I wanted the court to remove my name from the birth certificates of Keith and Andrea and replace it with Thomas Murray's name. After some negotiation with the judge and reviewing the DNA records, the court approved my request, ensuring there would be no legal issues regarding responsibility for them. Life here in the UAE is pretty good so far.
Karen. Being a single parent isn't all it's made out to be. I've got a lot more on my plate now, taking care of the kids and the house. Without Mark around, there's no one to share the load. My dad has been stopping by to handle some of the small repairs Mark used to do. He comes in, fixes what needs fixing, chats with the kids if they're home, and then leaves. He barely says a word to me. My parents found out why Mark left. They knew I was in love with Tommy before Mark, but they assumed it ended when Tommy married Brittany. They had no clue I'd been seeing Tommy all along. Tommy's on a tight leash himself. I haven't seen him since that day at the hotel when everything went south. I'm not sure if introducing him to the kids is even a good idea anymore. The house and most of our savings are in my name. I still have to work and cover the bills. The court ruled Mark isn't financially responsible for the kids, since they're not his, and I kept that from him. As for support for me, the money in the bank is mine to use as I see fit. Plus, I still have my secret account, though it wasn't that secret since Mark knew about it. I really screwed things up. Now what?
6 months later, Mark life has moved on. I still miss Karen, especially the kids. But whenever I think about her, I just get angry at her, and at myself for being so blind throughout our entire marriage. So I'm doing my best to stay busy and keep my mind off her. My social life has been slow to pick up, but it's starting to improve. I've gotten to know quite a few people I work with, and I've come across some incredibly talented individuals, each here for their own reasons. Some are here for the money, others to experience a different lifestyle and culture, and a few are here to heal from tough experiences. I guess I'm here for all of those reasons. Last month, I went on a desert adventure to an oasis on the motorcycle I bought, a used BMW F800 GS that I've equipped for touring. There's a motorcycle club here that organizes weekend trips, so I signed up for the fun and to explore more of the country beyond the overpriced city. Amanda mentioned she had always wanted to do something like that, so I invited her along. She had never ridden a motorcycle before, and it was my first time taking a passenger. It turned out to be a blast. We had a great time. The organizer assumed that we were a couple, so when we arrived at our destination, only one room was reserved for us, and there was only one bed in it. The hotel was fully booked, so we had no choice but to stay in the same room. It was a little awkward at first, but we managed. I suggested that she sleep on the floor, but she laughed and said that it was not necessary and that we would be fine in the same bed. I woke up in the morning with my arm around her waist. I didn't plan this, but it turned out that way. Amanda was still asleep, but she was turning around. I almost lost control of myself. I quietly moved away and headed to the bathroom before the situation got too awkward. When I came out, she was already up and getting dressed. She caught my gaze and teased, "Have you never seen a woman before?" Then she went to the bathroom. I heard the water running, and then she screamed, "Are you coming or not?" This moment changed everything. After that, everything changed.
18 months later, Amanda, Mark, and I have returned to London to visit my parents. They actually met him last Christmas when we came back for the holidays. My father works as a banker, and my mother is a teacher. They're financially comfortable and nearing retirement. Naturally, they were curious about the American man I had told them I was bringing home to meet. My father wanted to get to know Mark better, so they headed to the local pub for a pint or two and a chat. A few hours later, they returned, with my father smiling and clearly feeling more at ease around Mark. It's obvious that my father took the time to really get to know him, and I'm sure he shared his thoughts with my mother later. Now, it's summer, and we're back with some big news for my parents. Mark and I are moving to the UK. Well, technically it's not back for Mark, since he's never lived here before. He's landed a new job with his company, working on a major construction project in the Cotswolds. The salary is excellent, so we've decided to rent a house for the time being, with plans to potentially buy in a couple of years, depending on how things go. We need at least a 3-bedroom home, and I'd love to have 2 bathrooms so we don't have to share with guests. Yes, I'm selfish like that. The other big news is that I'm expecting... Our baby is due in November. So we want to be settled in, get all the medical arrangements sorted, and, oh yeah, get married. That too.
Karen, I've searched for Mark online almost every day since he left. I still have the letter he left for me in the kitchen. The kids were devastated when the father they knew walked out without saying a word to them. What could he have possibly said? Sorry, kids, but I'm not really your father, and your mother's a lying, worthless cheat, so I'm leaving. Yeah, that would go over well. I know I'm the one who created this mess. I've been seeing a therapist once a week and will probably keep going as long as my insurance covers it. She told me I was lying to myself, thinking I could have both men without facing consequences. She said I set Mark up to fail as a husband and father, so it was inevitable that he would leave. She urged me to apologize to Mark and the kids. That would be nice if I could find him. I don't have the money to hire a private investigator, so I ask his family now and then if they would kindly give me a way to contact him. Mark's father tells me to get lost, and his mother won't even speak to me. We're in a smaller house now. It's more affordable. The kids hate it, but it's what we can manage. I'm driving Mark's old Subaru. It's still reliable and gets the job done.
Mark, I've worked hard to forget a time in my life when I believed I was the luckiest man on earth, until that illusion shattered. If it hadn't been for the chance moment I saw my ex-wife with her lover at the hotel that day, I might still be in the dark. But I found out, and I had to act. 10 years of deception is no small thing. How can someone live with themselves, looking their partner in the eyes day after day, saying they love them while betraying them all along? How can they steal the love meant for one and give it to another? How can they lie to their own children? I'm far from perfect, and many may judge how I handled Karen and her betrayal, but it was the only way I could move forward and still live with myself. My biggest regret is what it did to the kids, Keith and Andrea. I hope they've had a chance to get to know their real father and that he can love them as much as I did. Karen destroyed my love. She poisoned that well. I couldn't look at Keith and Andrea, knowing their existence was the result of their mother's deceit. They deserve better. Every day I'll strive to be the best father I can to my child.
Jordan, I get the last word. Mark's actions were extreme, but I thought he would regret leaving the kids, even though they weren't biologically his. He was there in the delivery room when they were born, and he raised them. He was the man they called Dad. He changed diapers, fed and burped them, and was there for their first words and steps. But I saw a friend who was deeply hurt by the betrayal of a woman who had promised to love him. She deceived him in the worst possible way, lying to him every single day of their marriage, hiding the fact that neither of the children was his. The only way it could have been worse would have been if she'd taken a gun and shot him. I understand why Mark left. As his friend and his lawyer, I supported him. I still get calls from Karen asking where he is and begging me to tell him to call her or come home. I passed on a few of those messages until Mark asked me to stop, and so I did. Every 3 or 4 months, I get a quick email from Mark updating me on where he is and what's going on in his life. I know he's leaving the UAE for the UK, and I know he has a new woman in his life named Amanda. I've promised not to tell Karen anything. I'm happy for Mark. He's even set up a college fund for Keith and Andrea, and I'm the trustee. I'll make sure they get the money when the time comes. On a personal note, I've gotten married, yes, to Wolfie, although our families call her Hannah. She's pregnant and we're expecting a baby in December. I'd better drop her nickname by the time our child can understand it. I don't want to scare the kid.